The sun was spilling gold across the riverside, the kind of afternoon where everything felt calm, where the air smelled faintly of grass warmed by the light and the chatter of families echoed like music. Children's laughter rang out as they chased each other along the narrow path, their shoes kicking up little clouds of dust, while parents spread picnic blankets and unwrapped sandwiches. It was a day of ordinary joy, the kind that no one ever expects to be shattered. Yet, in the span of a heartbeat, everything changed. A girl, no older than 7, had been playing at the very edge of the water, chasing a butterfly that danced too close to the river. Her hair glowed in the sunlight, her small sneakers slipping against the smooth stones as she leaned forward to watch the insect float lazily over the surface. She reached her hand out, giggling, unaware of the danger beneath her. The butterfly fluttered out of reach, and in her attempt to follow it, her foot slid on the wet stone. There was a sharp gasp, a splash, and then chaos. The river wasn't calm that day, it was deceptive. Though the surface glistened like glass under the sun, the current ran strong, tugging mercilessly at anything that disturbed it. The moment the girl fell in, the water swallowed her with terrifying speed. Her tiny arms flailed as she tried to push herself up, her mouth opening in a scream that was quickly muffled by the rush of water. People nearby froze, their cheerful conversations collapsing into panic. A man dropped his sandwich. A woman covered her mouth in horror. Someone yelled, "Help, she's in the water." The scene unraveled so quickly that no one knew what to do. Parents lunged forward, but they were too far. One man fumbled to kick off his shoes, but fear anchored him to the spot, the current looking far more dangerous than he had the courage to fight. Seconds dragged into eternities, and the girl's head bobbed under again and again, each time staying down longer than the last. And then, movement. A sudden, sharp movement from a figure no one expected. A golden retriever, sitting by a bench a few feet away, ears perked at the sound of the splash. He had been tied loosely to the wooden slats, his leash slack as his owner rummaged through a picnic basket. The dog had been quiet until now, content to watch the world with those intelligent, soulful eyes. But in that instant, something inside him changed. His body stiffened, his tail shot upward, and his focus narrowed onto the water. He knew. Somehow, instinct burned through him louder than the shouts of the people around. Without a single moment of hesitation, the retriever lunged forward. The leash snapped free from the bench as his muscular frame propelled him toward the riverbank. His paws tore up clumps of grass as he sprinted, his chest pumping with urgency. Onlookers gasped, not only at his sudden burst of motion but at the sheer determination written into every line of his body. He wasn't just running, he was charging into purpose. The girl's head disappeared again, and the air filled with screams. At that precise second, the golden retriever leapt. His body arced through the air, muscles tensed, ears flying back. Time seemed to slow, the dog suspended for a heartbeat against the backdrop of the glowing river. His paws reached forward, his mouth open as though he was about to bark, though no sound came. The water below gleamed like liquid fire, waiting to swallow him whole. And then, splash, the dog plunged into the river, sending up a spray of silver droplets that glittered in the sunlight before falling back like rain. His strong body disappeared beneath the surface for only a second before bursting back through, head up, ears plastered against his skull, eyes burning with focus. With powerful strokes, he began to swim, cutting through the current with ease born of instinct and strength. People on the bank shouted in disbelief. A woman clutched her chest. A little boy pointed with wide eyes, yelling, "The dog! The dog's going after her!" Some began cheering encouragement as though their voices could give him more strength, while others cried openly, overcome with the sight of such bravery. The golden retriever surged forward, water streaming off his fur as he fought against the current. Every pull of his legs pushed him closer to the girl, who was still thrashing weakly, her cries barely audible over the river's roar. Her eyes were wide with terror, her mouth gasping for air, and then she saw him. She saw the golden head moving toward her, the determined eyes locked onto hers, and for a fleeting second, hope flickered in her gaze. The retriever paddled harder, his body rocking with effort, his breath heavy. He didn't slow, didn't falter. The crowd on the shore seemed to vanish into silence. All that mattered in that instant was the distance closing between the dog and the girl. 10 feet, 8 feet, 5. His chest burned, his muscles screamed, but still he swam. The river tugged, but it would not win, not while he had strength left in his body. Finally, he reached her. With a powerful kick, he thrust his head forward, bumping against her shoulder. The girl latched onto him instinctively, her small hands gripping at his wet fur. She coughed violently, sputtering water from her lungs, but she clung tight as though she had just grabbed onto life itself. The retriever adjusted, letting her drape her arms around his neck, and then, with renewed determination, turned back toward the shore. On land, the crowd erupted into shouts, voices colliding in a desperate mix of fear and encouragement. Some waded in as far as they dared, stretching their arms out as if willing themselves closer. Others clasped their hands together, whispering prayers under their breath. No one could look away. They were witnessing something extraordinary, something raw, heroic, and utterly real. And through it all, the dog swam on. The river was not forgiving. It surged with the kind of power that humbled even the strongest of swimmers. The golden retriever, drenched and gasping, felt the current pressing against his chest, tugging him sideways, pulling him away from the shore. But he didn't slow. The girl's small arms were wound tightly around his neck, her weight dragging against him, her sobs filling the air whenever she managed to lift her head from the water. She was trembling, her grip desperate, clinging to him as though she knew, even in her young mind, that this animal was the only thing standing between her and the river's merciless pull. The crowd onshore had grown restless, their fear climbing with every second. A man took a step into the water but froze as the icy current wrapped around his legs, the strength of it shocking him into stillness. He stumbled back out, shaking his head in disbelief. Another shouted, "Swim, come on, boy," as though his words might lend strength to the retriever's muscles. A few people pulled out their phones, but even as screens lit up and cameras recorded, no one could look away with indifference. Everyone watching felt the same thing, a mix of awe and dread. The retriever kicked harder, his body slicing forward inch by inch. Water poured over his face, into his mouth, but he shook it away, his determination never wavering. His fur, once golden and fluffy, was plastered flat to his frame, revealing every line of muscle. His breath came in heavy bursts, snorts of effort as he forced himself through the torrent. The girl clung tighter, her face pressed into the wet scruff of his neck. "Don't let go," she whispered, though her voice was so faint, it was nearly drowned out by the roar of the water. Each second stretched into forever. The bank still seemed impossibly far, the arms of the people reaching out for them a cruel illusion. The retriever's body burned with exhaustion, his legs aching with the relentless strokes. His mind, however, was locked onto one single truth: the girl had to live. It wasn't instinct alone driving him anymore, it was something deeper, something no one could explain but everyone would later swear they had seen in his eyes. The river fought back with vicious persistence. Just as they inched closer, the current caught them sideways, dragging them downstream with terrifying speed. Gasps erupted from the bank as the dog and girl spun, her little hands nearly slipping from his soaked fur. She cried out, choking, her mouth filling with water again. The retriever twisted in the current, forcing his body to turn back against the drag, his paws cutting through with furious strokes. He coughed out water himself, but he refused to let the flow carry them away. He realigned, steadying himself like a seasoned swimmer, though no human had ever taught him how. The girl's eyes were wide, her tiny lips quivering. For a moment, she looked as though she would let go, the current pulling so fiercely it seemed to beg her small hands to release. But the retriever gave a strong shake of his head, spraying droplets into her face, and that simple movement anchored her. She tightened her grip, digging her fingers deep into his wet fur, and he surged forward again, giving everything he had left. On the bank, a woman fell to her knees, sobbing into her hands. Another man shouted to the dog as though he were his own child, "You can do it. Bring her home." The tension had twisted the crowd into one pulsing heart, every beat shared, every breath held as they watched the fight unfold. The retriever's chest heaved. His body was tired, almost unbearably so. Every kick felt heavier, every stroke weaker, but his spirit did not waver. With a guttural sound, half a bark and half a gasp, he pushed forward. Slowly, painfully, the gap between them and the bank began to shrink. 10 feet, 9, 8. The girl's coughing grew louder, her voice returning little by little, a fragile sound but one that gave the crowd hope. The dog adjusted his angle, veering slightly toward where the bank curved inward. It was instinct again, a perfect decision that shaved precious feet from their journey. People waded in knee-deep now, reaching, their hands trembling in anticipation. "Come on, boy," one man muttered under his breath, as though willing the retriever closer. The air was thick with urgency, heavy with the knowledge that failure wasn't an option. 7 feet, 6. Each stroke was a battle. The retriever's eyes, once gleaming gold, were glazed with strain, but he never let them stray from the shore. He knew where he had to go. He knew the girl's life depended on it. He kicked again, forcing his body upward whenever the weight of the current threatened to push him under. The girl sobbed, her tears mixing with the river, but she held on, whispering softly into his ear, words no one else could hear, please, thanks, perhaps even prayers. 5 feet, 4. The water became shallower here, but the current remained ruthless. The retriever's paws scraped against something solid, stones hidden beneath the surface. His legs trembled with exhaustion, but he pressed them down, clawing for purchase. His chest broke the surface fully now, his breath tearing out of him in ragged bursts. The girl's head lifted higher, her cries filling the air, and the sound drew the crowd forward in unison, their arms outstretched like a net waiting to catch her. 3 feet, 2. And then, finally, strong hands reached out and grabbed the girl's small arms. A man lifted her from the retriever's back, pulling her into his chest as she coughed violently, spitting river water into his shirt. The crowd erupted in cheers, clapping, crying, some dropping to their knees with relief. The girl was safe, she was alive, but in that triumphant moment, their joy was tempered by a chilling realization. The retriever, who had carried her this far, was still in the water. He floated just beyond the man's reach, his paws moving weakly, his head bobbing under and then up again. The current, though shallow here, was still dragging at his tired frame. For the first time, he seemed unsure if he could take another step. The girl, wrapped tightly in the man's arms, twisted her head. Her voice, hoarse and raw, cried out through her tears, "Buddy." The sound pierced the air, silencing the cheers instantly. All eyes turned back to the water. The retriever's ears twitched at the sound of his name. He blinked slowly, as though her voice had lit a fire deep inside him, reminding him why he had leapt in the first place. With a final burst of effort, he kicked. His body lurched forward, dragging through the shallows. His paws struck bottom again, claws scraping the stones, and with one last push, he forced himself up onto the muddy bank. He collapsed onto the sand, chest heaving, sides rising and falling with labored breath. His fur was heavy with water, his muscles shaking uncontrollably, but he was out. He had made it. The crowd roared, people surged forward, kneeling around him, their hands stroking his soaked fur, their voices choked with admiration. The girl wriggled free from the man's hold and stumbled toward him, collapsing against his side, hugging him with every ounce of strength her small body had. She sobbed into his chest, whispering his name again and again, "Buddy, buddy, buddy." The retriever closed his eyes, his body trembling, but his tail thumped weakly against the ground. He had done it. He had saved her. The riverbank was chaos and relief all at once. Cheers rang out, but they were broken by sobs, by the sound of people calling out to each other, by the wet coughs of the girl who had just been dragged from the water. Some shouted for blankets, others fumbled with phones to call for help, and yet all eyes eventually landed on the golden retriever lying motionless in the sand. For a moment, the victory felt incomplete, suspended in uncertainty. The child was safe, but what about the one who had risked everything to bring her back? The retriever's chest rose and fell, shallow and ragged. His fur clung heavily to his body, dripping rivulets of water into the dirt beneath him. His paws twitched faintly as if they still remembered the desperate kicks he had made against the current. Around him, a semicircle of people gathered, some kneeling, some standing with hands pressed to their mouths. They couldn't look away. This dog, this unexpected hero, had done what none of them had dared to do, and now he seemed to teeter between life and exhaustion. The girl, freed from the strong arms that had pulled her out, scrambled to his side. Her knees sank into the mud, but she didn't care. She wrapped her little arms around his soaked body and pressed her cheek to his heaving chest. "Buddy," she whispered, her voice trembling, "wake up, please." The crowd went silent at her words, their celebration melting into raw, collective fear. The retriever stirred faintly, his ears twitching at the sound of her voice. His eyes, heavy and glazed with fatigue, fluttered open just enough to catch sight of her face. Something flickered there, recognition, comfort, maybe even relief. His tail, weak but determined, gave a slow thump. Against the ground. It was small, almost imperceptible, but to the girl it was everything. She let out a sob of joy, hugging him tighter. Someone in the crowd dropped their jacket over the dog, trying to warm his trembling frame. Another crouched down and rubbed his sides briskly, whispering encouragement as if the retriever could understand every word. In truth, perhaps he did. The bond between people and dogs had always been built on a language beyond words, one of looks, gestures, and unspoken loyalty. "Is he going to be okay?" a boy asked, his voice breaking. No one answered right away. A man cleared his throat and said, "He's strong. He'll be okay. He has to be." It sounded more like a prayer than a promise. The girl wouldn't let go of him. She was shivering herself, her thin arms covered in goosebumps, her hair plastered to her face, but none of that mattered. She only knew one thing. She was alive because of him. Her small hand stroked his soaked fur in uneven motions, her lips close to his ear as she whispered, "You're my hero, buddy. Don't leave me." The retriever's breathing steadied, little by little. Each exhale came easier than the last, as though her presence alone was enough to draw him back from the edge of collapse. His body no longer shook violently, though he still lay heavy on the ground, spent from the ordeal. Slowly, he turned his head until his wet nose pressed lightly against the girl's arm. She gasped softly at the touch, then smiled through her tears. By now, someone had called emergency services, and distant sirens wailed through the air, faint at first but growing louder. The crowd parted, some running to guide the responders toward the riverbank. Others remained kneeling close to the dog, unwilling to step away from the moment they knew they would never forget. When the medics arrived, their first instinct was to tend to the girl. She was wrapped quickly in a thermal blanket, checked for injuries, her breaths measured against the cold air. But even as they worked, her eyes never left Buddy. She kept glancing over the shoulder of the medic, tears still streaming, as if afraid that if she looked away too long, he might slip from her again. "Her vitals are good," one of the medics said to the crowd, and a wave of relieved sighs broke out. But the girl tugged on the sleeve of the woman kneeling beside her and pointed insistently. "Him," she croaked, her voice raw. "Help Buddy too." It startled the medic, but she nodded, turning toward the retriever. Though she was trained for humans, her hands softened as she knelt beside him. She checked his breathing, felt his trembling frame, and smiled. "He's exhausted, but he's strong," she assured the girl. "He just needs rest." The words seemed to ripple through the crowd, releasing the breath everyone had been holding. Smiles replaced tears, and whispers of admiration rose. "What a dog," someone said in awe. Another murmured, "That's the bravest thing I've ever seen." People who hadn't spoken to each other before now exchanged glances of shared wonder, bound together by what they had witnessed. The girl leaned down again, pressing her forehead against Buddy's. "Hear that? You're going to be okay," she whispered, as if delivering the message straight into his heart. And for the first time since dragging himself from the river, Buddy let out a faint, contented sigh. As the chaos of sirens and voices swirled around them, a new kind of quiet settled in the center of it all. The dog and the girl, their bond sealed in a way that no words could capture, sat at the heart of the crowd. To everyone watching, it was clear that something extraordinary had unfolded. It wasn't just a rescue, it was a story of love, courage, and loyalty that would echo far beyond this riverbank. By the time Buddy was lifted gently into a blanket and carried to a waiting vehicle, the girl clung to his side, refusing to let go until someone promised she could ride with him. She didn't care about the stares, or the murmurs of sympathy, or even the warmth of the blanket around her shoulders. All she cared about was that he knew he wasn't alone, that he felt her beside him as strongly as she had felt him in the river. And as the vehicle pulled away, the crowd left behind exchanged looks they knew they'd carry for a lifetime. They had come to the river expecting nothing more than a peaceful afternoon, but they had witnessed a miracle. They had seen courage take the shape of a dog, a creature who hadn't hesitated when humans had faltered. Later, when the story spread, as such stories always do, it carried with it the same awe that had rippled across the riverbank that day. Some told it as a tale of instinct, others as proof of the bond between people and their animals. But for those who had stood there, who had heard the girl's cries and seen the golden retriever leap into the current, it was something far greater. It was a reminder of what love, in its purest form, could achieve. And for the girl, it was simpler still. She would remember every second, the cold water, the panic, the moment she thought it was the end. And then she would remember the warmth of Buddy's fur beneath her hands, the strength of his body pulling her toward life, and the way his eyes never left hers even when he was too tired to move. To her, Buddy wasn't just a dog. He was her savior, her guardian, her family. That night, as Buddy lay safe and resting, the girl curled up beside him, her small hand resting gently on his chest. His breathing was steady now, deep and calm, and his tail twitched every so often in dreams. She whispered one final promise before sleep claimed her: "I'll never forget what you did for me." And she never did. Neither did anyone else who stood on that riverbank. Because on that day, courage had a name, and it was Buddy.